Hello, Rise Up Visionaries. More specifically, hello, Gather and Get Moving friends. I'm Susan May, and I'm here to share my journey to inspire you on your journey of unplugging. And tonight I have a very special guest to sit here and have I know it will be an informative and inspiring conversation, and I'm just really excited to have her here. Bretigne Shaffer is a homeschool mom, an author, a podcaster, and an entrepreneur. She is a staunch advocate for liberty and freedom, and her writing deepened my personal understanding of what's going on in the world in a way that, like, I had a gut feeling about things, but I couldn't put it into words. And so when I came across Bretigne's words, it was like a light shining on things for me. So without further ado, here is Bretigne.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here today, Bretigne.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be so fun. So I see we have one person watching. So I just introduced Bretigne. She is a homeschool mom, a podcaster, an entrepreneur. And as I was saying, I first came across her 2 years ago. A mutual friend shared a post, and I actually want to start off by sharing that post. So Bretigne, I thought I would organize our conversation today a little bit like past and then present-ish, something that happened relatively recently, a story you shared with me. And then I know you really want to focus on the future, and that is something that is really important to me. And I know everyone here in the Gather and Get Moving group too is also very focused on the future. So we're going to do a little bit of the past just because I think it's so important for us to connect and learn each other's stories, and it helps us understand each other. And I think it's really inspiring too. So hi, Laura Swain. I can actually see your comment. So excited to finally meet you, Bretigne, she says. Can you see that, Bretigne, or not?
I can see it between, but that's fine.
Okay, so I'll let you know what's going on in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to share this post that Bretigne wrote 2 years ago. Okay, we have another Facebook user says hi. Awesome. It's working. Woohoo.
I've never done a Facebook Live before.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so this post Bretigne wrote in June of 2020, so just almost exactly 2 years ago. And I'm just going to read it out loud, so because I've read it several times, but people watching now maybe haven't read this before. So I'm going to read it and they can read along with me. Bretigne said, "I'm going to say this over and over and over again. The reason the lockdowns were/are a terrible idea is not that COVID-19 is, quote, not a very serious threat, unquote. Yes, for the vast majority of the population, it is true that it is not a very serious threat. But that is not the point. Even if COVID-19 were airborne Ebola or something even more horrifying, centralized decisions imposed from the top down by people who will never have to pay for the harm they do would still be a terrible solution. Why? Because centralized coercive decision making is always, always, always the worst possible way to make decisions. Why? Because knowledge problem. Parentheses, no central authority can possibly have the same knowledge that thousands or millions of individuals do about what their wants and needs and risk tolerances are. Because calculation problem. Without private ownership and decision making and the signals that come from that, the people making things can't know how much of what is needed or what wanted. But mostly because no accountability, meaning coercive authorities are never held accountable for their actions. That is the whole foundation of government." Okay, so before I kind of jump over to Bretigne, okay, I stopped sharing, correct? Bretigne, you don't see the...
Yes, I'm just...
Okay. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. Before I get some of your thoughts on this, I just want to share why this was so powerful for me, because I had never read any of Bretigne's writing. It was the first thing that I had, my first introduction to her as a person and her writing. And the reason I really loved it is because in my gut, I understood that what was going on, what was wrong, but I didn't have like the background or the knowledge or the words at the time to understand why it was wrong. So when I read this post, it was like, yes, 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 like this is why it's wrong. And it just made so much sense to me. So I think the third point, Bretigne, the coercive authorities are never held accountable. And that is the whole foundation for government. I think a lot of people that haven't thought about the state or the government in the way that you have will struggle with that one. And so I thought I would just kind of pull that one out and see if you could kind of expand on that or just clarify or maybe share like why you feel so strongly that way about that point.
Yeah, I mean, I actually feel like this is sort of the nut that we need to crack, like as a society. This is sort of the biggest lie, misconception, whatever you want to call it. It's a thing that we've been, especially if you went to government schools, you've been taught since day one that we live in a representative democracy and the government is us. It represents our interests. And, our system is better than all the other ones because we control the government. But when you start looking at it more closely, or if you just live through some times like the last couple of years, you start to see, wait a second, that's not exactly true. In fact, it's kind of just the opposite of the truth, because just as an example, let's look at the politicians. So I came from California, and Governor Newsom just imposed. He became a dictator. He imposed these completely illegal restrictions on our lives. Told businesses how when they could and couldn't operate. You had to wear masks. Schools had to close. Churches had to close. All this stuff. And in a few cases, he was actually taken to court. So there was a church that won a court case against him, and two of the legislators actually took him to court over his orders. And the court and the appeals court determined that no, of course he doesn't have any right to create these orders. This is all unconstitutional. He's still doing it. Right. So, I mean, all you have to do is look in front of you and look and see, what happens when a politician violates the Constitution? What happens when a government official violates the Constitution? Governor Cuomo in New York, ordered all of these nursing homes to take in COVID positive patients from the hospitals. Basically creating these not killing fields, but these places where people were destined to die because the one group of people who it actually made sense to isolate were people who were actually at risk. So the elderly, people who were in nursing homes. And what did he do? Set these. It's murder. I don't know how you can look at that and say it's not murder. And there are other instances I could point to too in this whole thing where it's like, deliberate or not, it's at the your actions have killed people. And if you were anything but a politician or a government official, you would be held accountable for that. You'd be in jail.
Right.
So
yeah, I think you're getting to that. That's the whole thing that I think a lot of people would struggle with, that authorities are never held accountable. I think the average person wants to believe if someone does something criminal or wrong, they're held accountable. And maybe in quote normal times or calmer times, it was easier to not understand that because like we weren't paying attention or whatever. And so I agree with you. Like we're seeing it in real time now, right? And more people are realizing that. So I guess for me, I'm wondering, and maybe this can segue into, I wanted to know more about your story and your background. I told you that before.
Yeah.
How did you, because this was June 2020 when you shared it. So how did you already know that? Like, are you just like an avid history study, person that loves history? And so how would you say, if you could kind of wrap that up quickly?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I guess I was lucky because I was raised by anarchists. So
there you go.
I was born into this. And starting like as a teenager, I had to defend my views, which were not very well formed at the time. And it was just, oh, well, of course the government's our enemy. Didn't you know that? But I had to really defend my views in high school and then in college and then professionally, as I was a journalist after college. And so I've been battling this for a long time. I've been sort of engaging with these ideas for a long time, and then studying too. I've studied Austrian economics. I can't really say I'm a historian. I feel like I'm actually not very well read in history,
Okay.
but I know enough history to recognize, when things are repeating right in front of me.
Patterns.
I spent a long time. I spent about 10 years after college in Asia, and lived mostly in Hong Kong, but traveled and wrote a lot in China. So I got to see up close, these two opposite systems. I was in China as the economic reforms were really starting to get rolling, and I could see the contrast between how people lived before they had some measure of economic freedom, and then how things changed very rapidly once they did. And then just the contrast between Hong Kong and China was just, I think there's some value in seeing that in not just in textbooks, but like in real life to
Yeah.
see what those systems mean.
Yeah, makes it very real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you would like to share just about your background? Or so you said you were raised by anarchists. Anything that you want to expand on that? Or
my dad was Butler Shaffer, who passed away a few years ago, and he was he's kind of best known, I guess, for he's written several books, and he also wrote a lot on Lou Rockwell on Lou Rockwell's blog, and his I think his philosophy sort of changed over the years, but he really just did not believe at all in institutionalized coercion, and was very clear about, that's what the state is, and we're given all these reasons why we're supposed to think it's either necessary or even good, but it doesn't take a lot of examination to look and see that, no, that's what the people who want to be our masters tell us, but it's not really the truth. So that was my dad.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about the future, what we need to do is take all this theory, right, and put it into action. And so I think this is a great segue into that story that I would love for you to share, and I'll refresh your memory. I'm not expecting. You told me about how recently your daughter Ariel was in the hospital, and so you know the story I'm talking about, because I think it's such a powerful example of that will just help people understand how powerful they are, as an individual, and just knowing in your guts what's the right thing to do, and even when you're scared, doing that thing. So do you want to take over on the story? Or
yeah, I'll tell this story. So we were in the hospital. So our daughter has a genetic condition, and one of the biggest sort of medical issues that comes along with that is seizures. So she has intellectual disability and also just seizures, which we've been battling for a long time. 2021 was a particularly bad year for seizures, and I ended up spending 8.5 weeks in the hospital with her. On one of those hospital trips, the hospital changed, and it wasn't just the hospital. I think it was statewide. All the hospitals were doing this or doing some version of it. They changed their policy. So I was in there with her as a parent, obviously, because she needed me to be there. They changed their policy so that if you were going to be in with a patient, you had to either show proof of vaccination or produce a negative COVID test. And they did this while I was actually already in the hospital with her. So I asked to speak with the floor manager and the floor manager. And I said, what's, I obviously can't produce proof of vaccination. What happens if I go out to get this test? My husband comes and stays with her for a little bit. I go out and get the test. What if it comes back positive? And she said, well, then we won't let you back in. And so I just said, well, I'm not doing that. That's, I'm not gonna leave my daughter's bedside to go out and, do this stupid thing, which I didn't use those words, but of course it was, to go out and do this thing if there's a chance you're not going to let me back in. That's not going to happen. And so she said, well, then, we'll have to ask you to leave and we'll call security and all this stuff. And I said, well, you don't need to call security. If you ask us to leave, we'll leave. But I want you to put this in writing. I want you to say that you are discharging us involuntarily. You're discharging my daughter from the hospital, even though she needs to be here, because I won't go out and do this thing. I want that in writing, and I want someone to sign it. And when I said that, I mean, she said, well, I can't do that, but I'll go and find, I'll find out who can. And the conversation kind of wrapped up. And she said, this was like in the evening. So she said, we'll come back. And in the morning was when that policy was taking place. So she said, well, in the morning, someone's going to come and they're going to say, you've got to go out and get this test. I said, yeah, let's get something in writing. So the morning, so I stayed up all night and I wrote up my own sort of affidavit for, this is what I want you guys to sign. I want you to say that, my daughter's name is in the hospital because she needs care, because I acknowledge that discharging her from the hospital will put her life in danger. And I forget what else I said, but things like that. Basically, this is what I want you to sign. This is what I want you to put your name to. And so I hand wrote this little note. And morning came, and the floor manager came back into the room, and she said, well, the policy's been changed. So who knows, who knows? She said we had a meeting and decided, and so who knows what happened there. But, what I got from that experience is really, I mean, I was pushed up against a wall. There was no way I was going to walk out of that hospital room and not be able to come back. That's insane.
Right.
And I guess the other thing I should say is that having been in and out of the hospital so many times, and also having, being aware of medical freedom issues, especially over the last few years, I'm very much aware of the possibility of this thing coming up. So it's the kind of thing that it wasn't a complete surprise when it happened.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing that I've thought through, and I'm very clear about, I guess I'm very clear about what my line is, mm-hmm. and what I'm not, the line that won't be crossed. And I'm also more clear than I was before I sort of started thinking all this through, about, that it's not just my opinion that they're wrong. They're wrong.
Right.
And I don't mean every single time, sure, maybe something will come up where it's like there's a reasonable discussion to be had, and maybe they were even right. But in a lot of these situations, they are just wrong, and legally wrong, like wrong in a way that would not hold up in court.
And morally wrong.
Morally too. But what I've learned as I've sort of gotten into, I don't know if we're going to end up talking about the common law stuff, but as I've gotten into ways to enforce common law principles in real life, what's really satisfying about it is that in the common law tradition, there's a lot of common ground between moral and right. And what I learned this time around is, at some level, they know they're wrong. At some level, and especially when you start talking, in ways that sound legalistic, when you start asserting your rights, and when you start asking them to put things in writing, when you ask them to start giving you evidence, they know they're not on solid ground. And right. I think they're so used to just telling people what to do, and people going along with it, and even people going along with it when they don't really want to, but they don't know what else to do, that when someone pushes back, they fall over because they don't have ground to stand on. Again, not in every situation. Maybe there's some situations where they do, but in a situation like this, where they're trying to kick a kid out of a hospital because their mom won't go along with this crazy vaccine mandate crap.
Right.
I'm sorry, that's not gonna hold up in court.
And it's separating the child from their guardian. Like, mm-hmm. that to me is the real issue there. And when I think about this, I think about like maybe the nurse or whoever you're talking to. I think a lot of individuals in the system are squirming inside because that moral part of them knows it's wrong. They're like, I don't want to separate you from your child, but this is the rule. We have to do it, you know? But then there's the part of you that, like you explaining, like when you start saying it this way, like, well, I want it in writing. Then they're like, then they have to go to like the next higher up, right?
Yeah.
And then that's when they start realizing, oh man, we could get in trouble here, right? And that's that
they
kind of
need
thing.
to know that. They need to know.
And I this is what I love about these stories, is because it inspires me, and I feel like I appreciate you letting us know, like, you've been through the system, like you know, having your daughter in and out. Because I think someone like me, if I was in an ER, I don't go into these situations. I feel, I've told you before, if there's a white coat there, I worry that I will just like do what they tell me to, just out of habit.
Really
almost.
intimidating. It can be really intimidating. Yeah. And especially if it's an emergency situation, especially if you're not in that environment a lot, or you haven't thought this through, and suddenly there's an emergency and there's a person in a white coat saying, we're not going to treat your child unless you give him this
do this thing, right?
thing.
Yeah.
You know, I can see a lot of people being scared into going along with it.
Complying.
And I think that's why it's so important to think through these kinds of situations in advance, and to realize that they are not on solid ground in demanding that kind of thing. Right. And, you know, you need to hold them accountable. You need to, and in that moment you can, because if you let them know that you think what they're doing is wrong, and I don't mean that you have like 100% certainty that a court would side with you. I mean, like, you've got a pretty good reason to think that this is just wrong, and that this medical professional is putting themselves at risk by trying to force it on you. You need to stand on that ground, and you know, don't let them intimidate you, and recognize that they're so used to playing this game where they just push people around, and they tell you what to do and you do it. And I think everyone just sort of needs to really come to terms with themselves about what your rights are, and who, you know, what someone else has a right to do and what they don't. And you know, I think with hospitals and with medical professionals, there's a tendency to say, well, you know, if you don't like their policy, go to a different hospital. And of course, you know, that's kind of not really what it's all about, because the policies they don't set their own policies. They're dictated by the state and all this other stuff. But even forgetting all of that, they have to live up to certain standards just for their licenses. And I don't believe in medical licensing, but they do. And they have to, you know, they can be sued for medical malpractice. They can have license threatened, all this other stuff that's may not even be based on your concept of rights, but it's standards they have to live up to. So I'm getting a little off topic here. I just think it's really important to get very clear about what your line in the sand is.
Yeah.
And how you're going to defend that, like what it is you expect from these people.
And I think, especially with a child, that is a very you know, that boundary, I need to be with my child. You know, that is a solid that, you know, you can't leave them. You're not leaving them. So I think one of the biggest things, well, a few things I take from the story. First of all, I've already said it, but it just helps to hear them, because then you can imagine yourself doing it, right? And also, if you haven't been in that scenario. So thank you for sharing that. And I think one of the biggest things I get from it is, like, just buy yourself some time, you know, like, don't just like immediately say, oh, I got to do this, right? Like, have the conversation, ask the question, say, oh, I'm not leaving right now, you know, and you'll see how things unfold.
Can I just add another thing that I've found gets a different reaction, is when you use the words do not consent. So I've said in the past, like, they wanted to do a COVID test on my daughter, and I pushed back on that, and finally made a compromise where we did like a cheek swab thing. But the next time that I went in, I just said, and that it took, it was negotiation. It took a long time to get to that point, which was crazy. But the next time I went in, I said, they said, okay, we're going to need to do a COVID test. And I said, well, if it's, I don't consent to nasopharyngeal, so it's going to have to be something else. Immediately, they came in with a cheek swab. So
because you use the magic words.
I'm not going to consent to that. And those are legal words. Those are words that I can then pull up later on and say, I did this, I did this under duress, or, I did not consent to that.
Right.
And under duress is another thing. Like if you're really pushed into something and they're not going to back down, and you don't, like there was another situation where we had to get COVID tests in order to go in and be with our daughter for her operation. And, and that wasn't going to be my line in the sand. That like, okay, we'll do it. But I put in writing, we're doing this under duress. We don't agree with it. We don't think it's necessary. It's not medically necessary. And we're doing it under duress. So they have on record that,
that's
they,
great.
Kind of forced us to do this crazy stupid.
Right. And just imagine if a lot more people did that, right? Like, because I know for a fact, my father, they're still doing all these COVID testing up in New York State. He has no symptoms. It has nothing to do with anything, over and over and over again. And my mom said, they even said, oh, we don't feel like doing this anymore. We're just waiting for these policies, to like end, or what I mean?
So was Eichmann. Eichmann was waiting for the policies to change too, and he hanged because of it. So
yeah, it's crazy. Your story, it reminds me of one of Naomi Wolf's recent pieces when she was talking about standing up in New York City against the vaccine mandates.
The one where she went into the restaurant or something?
Yes, the restaurant. There was a restaurant, and then I think it was like an outdoor one too. Twice. It sounded like it was twice in one day.
Yeah.
And what I loved is how she shared how, her heart was probably pounding like crazy. She was expecting to be arrested. So I'd love to hear, like, how did you feel when you were going through this? Just because I think sometimes people think, oh, Bretigne just so brave and I couldn't do that. Like, share how you were feeling.
Well, first of all, when you're in that situation, you're in a really vulnerable position because you're there with your child, and and you're there because the child needs care. So that's already a very, very vulnerable position, and they totally take advantage of it. And everyone should know that. You should know that, those are the dynamics there. But yeah, no, my heart was pounding. I don't like confrontation. I avoid confrontation. I do, I go to great lengths to avoid confrontation. I really don't like it, but I didn't have a choice in that situation. And so I was like, definitely the adrenaline was going, my heart was racing and everything. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable. And I think people who want to push other people around count on it not being comfortable. They count on you. They count on people wanting to avoid confrontation and wanting for things to stay comfortable and easy. And, it's the mark of a bully. And that doesn't make everybody in that system a bully, but the system itself is a bully. And I think it's important to recognize that.
Right. Well, thank you. Okay. I think now is the perfect time to start segueing into the future then.
Yeah.
So I know you have a lot of exciting things coming up, and I just want to make sure that we touch on, the ones that are most important and that you really want to get the word out. I'm really excited to hear about the Free Yoga Fellowship myself, because I have a daughter. So where do you want to start?
Let me start with the big picture, because it all kind of ties together. It's all sort of under the Free Yoga Fellowship umbrella.
Okay.
So I guess it starts with our daughter, because, as soon as we got her diagnosis, I realized I just really want to ensure that she has a solid and safe future after we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge concern for anybody with children, with a child who has special needs.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew from my own family experience, my grandmother had spent the last like 8 years of her life in a PEO home, which was an old sort of mutual aid style. They're hardly around anymore. That one still exists, but it's changed a lot. Um, it's a private mutual aid society, and in my grandmother's case, one of the things that this society did was it created these homes all over the country where members could come and live out their days and be taken care of. It was an amazing level of care. And basically the deal was, as long as you could, as long as you were kind of functional and could sort of take care of yourself when you moved in, you could have a debilitating stroke the next day and they would still take care of you the rest of your life. And it was an amazing level of care. It didn't feel institutional at all. It was a real home. They had their meals together. They had activities together. I could go on and on and on, but the point is, I sort of had this experience already in my own life of seeing mutual aid in action. And so I kind of decided that's what we need to do for our daughter, and not just for our daughter, but for others. So let me back up a little bit. My idea for our daughter is to create something like that. So a home that's also like a community with lots of activities, not a home in the sense of like an institutional home, but an actual real living home where people are part of a community and they do meaningful things, work in gardens, take care of animals, create things, learn how to help others, that kind of thing. And so that's sort of the core of my dream of how this all started. And that's Friogan. That's the Friogan Fellowship. So I decided to create that and then COVID happened and a lot of things sort of changed about the specifics of how I would do it. But what I also realized was there's much more of a need. I was envisioning this need as being like for the special needs community, and I still do. I still feel like, what I want to do is create this community, this place, this physical place for a small group of people. Not like it's not going to be huge,
right. But it could be a model.
Exactly.
A model for other people.
Exactly. So it would be a model for other people, because when you have a child who has severe needs, like who's going to need close care the rest of their life. So not like not someone who's highly functional with autism or Down syndrome or something, but can live independently with a little support.
Right.
But when you've got people who need a lot more support, it gets very expensive. And my model is really about having that home and that community, and then having some business model attached to it that is subsidizing the care. And I had one idea for that before COVID, and that was kind of based on the tourism industry. That then became a little shakier, so I've switched over to a couple of other things. What I realized is this is not just about the special needs community anymore. Or maybe it wasn't just that, but when you look at elder care, and even when you look at healthcare and the nightmare that it's become, and I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail on that, because I could talk about that forever too, but
we'll have to have another chat.
Yeah. But just the abusiveness of that system, and just what we saw over this past year, pregnant mothers being forced to wear masks to deliver babies, and elderly people being, denied contact with their families,
dying alone,
people dying and, not being able to, we were so lucky, not lucky, but that my father passed away literally right before this started. He died at the end of December of 2019, and we were all able to be there with him. We were able to go and visit him, while he was in the hospital, and then to be with him at the end. And just the trauma of being forcibly prevented from that. When I try and imagine all of the trauma that's out there that other people have gone through, that one just for one family to have to suffer that alone is awful. But the fact that that happened to so many families and so many, vulnerable people dying alone, or people with someone with dementia not understanding why their family's not coming to visit. I mean, it's the horrors, and this is why. I mean, and I agree with Naomi Wolf. It's like when you get to that level of evil, it's like it's completely clear to me that this is a spiritual war. This is not something we're just fighting on the physical realm.
Yep.
But sorry, I was getting away from
that's okay.
What I was going to get back to was that it's really, so my vision now for Free Yoga Fellowship, it's because of our situation, it's still focused on special needs, but I think it has application much more widely, really across all of society, because what's been broken, and it's not just COVID that broke it, because it's been being over the years, is our whole social support system. And people have become so dependent and so complacent about it being the government's role to do this. Well, it gets back to that accountability thing. What happens to them if they just don't care for people well, or if they abuse them, which is what happened over the last 2 years, torture them? What happens? Nothing. They're not accountable. And so with mutual aid, it's private. And I'm sorry, my dog is going off.
It's okay.
People voluntarily sign up for your organization, or they don't. And then if you commit a criminal act against them, you're held accountable as a criminal, as it should be. So, so that's sort of the, that's the broad vision of Free Yoga Fellowship. And then the specifics are, the long-term living home and community for our daughter and others like that, with similar situations.
Right.
And also Free Yoga Fellowship Learning, which we started, when did it start? Just over a year ago, I guess, year and a half ago. And it's basically, it's the education arm of Free Yoga Fellowship.
I missed the third word, Bretigne. Free Yoga Fellowship.
Free Yoga Fellowship Learning.
Learning. Okay,
yeah. So it's basically what it is now. So the reason we started this was because in California, it just became impossible for our son to have any kind of normal, all the activities. If they weren't shut down, they then started demanding, proof of vaccination. And so, we really didn't want to leave California. And so I thought, well, let's start some activities. Let's see what we can get going ourselves. And there were other people in California too, and there still are, working on this kind of thing, working on sort of an expansion of homeschooling, I guess, like more in-person events and activities and things to kind of make up for all the things that have been taken away. So that's sort of what started this. We ended up kind of realizing, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen where we were, partly because homeschooling in California is just very different. It's more spread out. And so it was just hard to sort of build a community where we were. So what I ended up doing was we started creating these online classes, and they're for teens right now. We would like to expand it to more ages, and we probably will in the future, but right now we're focused on teens. And it's sort of it's a humanities focus. So we're not really doing STEM. It's really about sort of the core areas that I feel like are the most damaged in sort of higher education and teenage education. So for example, we have courses we have a course in common law. We have a course on the Constitution. We have a course on propaganda. It's like a media studies course, but it's really, it's called Propaganda and the Personal. And it's really about how you as an individual interact with propaganda, with media that's intentionally manipulative. And so it's really kind of a personal, it sort of starts out as an exploration of what's going on in the media, but then it becomes a sort of personal exploration of, what makes you vulnerable? What makes you as an individual vulnerable to certain kinds of manipulations, that kind of thing. We've got Austrian economics. Josh Mahorter, who was kicked out of he was a school teacher in California and was kicked out of his job for refusing the vaccine. He's teaching for us. He's doing some Austrian economics classes. Nice. We've got literature, English literature. We've got a creative writing class. So it's really focused. It's really focused on the humanities. It's really focused on, to me, the parts of the humanities that are the most missing and the most kind of that have been the most damaged by the politicization of education, is the way I look at it.
I can't tell you how much I love this, because I was just talking today with my almost 16-year-old daughter, and she was just talking about how she feels like everything's propaganda. Like, so let's let people know. Okay, so I can share your website. I'm going to share your website and show them where they can go to get that information. And then you can also tell people, so like when our class is coming up and how they can sign up. Oh, and also you need to explain that it is, it's a PMA, right?
Yes. Okay. So that's a big part of it. Yes. So it is. So Free Open Fellowship is a private membership association. What that means is that, and I'll give you another website too, because there is a Free Open Fellowship website that people can go to, and it's just freeorganfellowship.org.
Okay.
But why that's significant is that, there it is that private membership associations don't serve the public. We serve members only. And this was true of my grandmother's mutual aid society as well, which is why they were able to provide the level of care they were able to provide, because they didn't fall under the jurisdiction of all the regulatory agencies that come in and say, well, you've got to have, fire doors here and, all this stuff. So they were able to actually provide a much higher level of care at a much lower cost. That's the whole idea behind PMAs. The reason that so many people are starting PMAs now, right, is that, as an entity that's not serving the public, you're not subject to licensing. And so, for example, in California, the reason that the businesses, one of the reasons, the main reason I think that so many businesses caved into like the mask mandates, was that their cities or their county governments would then pull their licenses if they didn't. So even though it's not really a law, even though the mask stuff wasn't a law and it wasn't legal for the, sorry, that's my dog again. It wasn't legal for the governor to impose that. Didn't matter, because the city can pull your license kind of for whatever reason it wants to. And so as long as you're doing business, as long as you're operating kind of at the whim of some political group, they have control over you, and they can tell you what to do. So a lot of people are forming PMAs, private membership associations, and I might have to go help with the dog. Hang on one second.
Okay, no problem.
Going after some of the other plants or something.
Okay. I see someone is still watching. I don't know if it's Laura. And then we had another Facebook user say, hi, amazing interview. I am just starting to learn about PMAs myself. All right, you good?
Yeah, I think so. Because I talked about before that there might be some more interruptions.
Oh, it's okay. You're doing great. So I do. Okay, so just so people know how I got here, because I think it is the easiest way, Bretigne, because like it's kind of amazing that you got Bretigne.com.
Yeah.
So it's just her first name. So you have to notice how it's spelled though, Bretigne.com. If you go to her website, then she has the tab for the Free Yoga Fellowship. But can you tell us, like, so our class is coming up, or like, what is the best way to?
So this was, I need to update that actually. So we had an open house.
Right.
We're going to have another one. We were going to have it June 25th, but then my whole family got COVID and we're still recovering.
Okay.
So I don't know if we're going to pull that together. I will put up a new announcement though for the next. We're going to have a couple more open houses over the summer, just to introduce people. Yes, you can meet the teachers, you can ask questions, all that kind of thing. And then we will be starting classes again in the fall.
Okay.
And I don't have the date posted yet for when those are going to start, but we will be doing like the common law class, constitution class, Austrian economics, assuming enough people sign up for them, literature, propaganda, and creative writing. So we will be starting those in the fall. Probably the best thing to do if you're interested is, I mean, you can just write to me. You can also, there's on Free Yoga Fellowship, there's an email that you can write to ask questions, or you can come to one of the open houses and ask questions too. Yeah, that's the best way to find out more.
Okay, good. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. I know you have other things coming up too. Do you want to share about some of those other projects you have?
So I just started, so I'm on Substack also. I've moved my kind of regular writing I'm doing now on Substack. And I just started a private Substack, which is it's really for people who are serious about building solutions. So people who are interested in starting PMAs in healthcare or in in anything really, but it's really about building sort of parallel solutions. Sorry, my dog. It's about building parallel solutions to the brokenness that's around us. So that I have let's see, I posted an article, introducing that and saying if you want to join that, just email me, and I'll give you my email so that people can send it to the right email. And just say, I think, please add me to BPS. And I'll see that and I'll add you, because I have to add everyone individually.
Yeah, and I will make sure to share all the links. Like I'll upload this to YouTube and it will be on Facebook too, and I can put it in the comments there too. So we can share all of these links there.
Great. Yeah. So then what I'm going to be launching on July 4th is going to be a membership, a paid membership. So it's going to be similar in theme to this, and it'll be kind of an addition to it, but it'll be a little bit more intense. And it's really for people, I envision it as for people who are working on their own projects, although that's not a requirement. If you're just someone who really wants to learn more, that's the place for you too. But it's going to be more intensive in that we're going to have regular calls. We're going to have like a monthly Zoom call where we either get together and brainstorm and talk about projects and like give feedback, and people get ideas and make connections and that kind of thing, and then alternating with a Zoom call with an expert. And so an expert is like someone who is kind of known in the PMA community or known in the alternative, setting up alternative medical institutions community, people who are actually out there doing big things. And getting their input, getting to pick their brains. Yeah. So those are like the calls. There's also going to be a social media group, and I haven't decided which platform to use yet. I think I'm going to do MeWe. I'm definitely not going to do Facebook, but I'm thinking probably MeWe. I just have to look at a few other alternatives and be sure. Okay. But there will be, so that'll be like a social media group where people can, again, share their ideas, get to know each other. So part of the idea is to be informative, to like help people learn about how they can create real things in the real, in the real world instead of just sort of hypothesizing. But the other part is also to connect with others who are doing similar things and to really build a community. And I feel like that's kind of one of our most important tasks, really, is connecting all of us.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people doing it. There are communities forming already, but we really need to be doing more of that.
Yeah.
It's our biggest asset, and it's what we're going to need going forward to build what we want to build. We are going to need that community in order to do that. So yeah, the two sort of fit together.
Awesome. So are you envisioning for the membership, the paid membership, the Zoom calls, and then part of it will be the MeWe group or wherever you end up being, those are connected, yes or no?
Yes, those are, so the way I'm envisioning is that there will be like probably two MeWe groups. One will be attached to my existing Substack.
Gotcha.
And these will be private groups. So one will be attached to the existing private Substack.
Right.
And the other one will be attached to the paid membership.
Got it.
Group. So
perfect.
Yeah, two different with similar intent to connect and share information and all that, but one's part of the paid membership group and one is not.
So the best place probably for people to keep up with you is to get onto your private Substack, I would say, right? To keep up with everything.
Yeah, and if you're not, I mean, if building solutions is not really, if you're not really serious about that, if you're, by all means join and learn about it. But if you really just want to keep up with my general stuff, I also have a non-private Substack. I have just a regular Substack, and that's called On the Banks. But also just if you search my name on Substack, and I think it's also on
your website.
Yeah, it's on my website too.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
perfect.
Yeah, that's probably the best place to keep up with
your writing and if you start doing more podcasts again and all that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything I guess I had one more, just like advice for people who feel like overwhelmed or anxious or maybe frozen by the magnitude of the problems. Like, what keeps you going, maybe, and like, what would you say to people? I know it's a big question. So no pressure.
That's a huge question. Well, I think one thing is, it's funny. So I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine about this. Is to be really mindful about where you put your attention, and to not fall into the trap of thinking that you have to keep up with everything. I think just be aware of there's so much intentional effort being thrown your way to keep you anxious and fearful and helpless, feeling helpless. And so part of it is just not even necessarily totally tuning it out, but recognizing that you don't have to plug into that feed all the time. It's not the only important source of information out there. And I guess for me, what makes me sort of very positive is that I'm aware of actual tools that can be used, like the PMA. That's a real tool that you can use to bypass the system. And it takes some education. It takes really learning about how to do it. It's not easy. It's not something you can just pick up and start using right away. But it's a real tool. Notices of liability. Notices of liability are a similar thing. It's something that you gotta really educate yourself, but it's something where you can actually take action. And I think people are hungry for action. I think people are really hungry for something to do. Yeah. And so it's so easy to just fall into just vote, find a candidate or write to your senator, talk to your representatives. Well, I think at this point it's pretty clear that's not going to do anything. But there are things you can do that can have an impact and that can make things better.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of getting hold of those tools and learning how to use them.
Yeah.
So I think just the fact that that exists, I mean, there are a lot of other things too. I think just the fact that, you know, having kids, like, I don't have a choice.
Right. We got to keep going. We got to keep trucking.
Yeah.
Just do our best.
We
Yeah.
can't give up. But knowing that there are actual practical things you can do, that it's not just screaming into the darkness, is helpful, I think.
Yeah, I love the PMA thing because I am not knowledgeable about it, but it keeps coming up for me, like, you know, from other sources. And so I'm starting to really feel interested and wanting to learn more. And you saying that, you know, you have to learn, but once you know about it, it's like, oh, it makes sense. And it's not that difficult. I was actually listening. Actually, Bretigne has a podcast about PMAs. You did an interview. And so I started it. I haven't finished it yet. But it reminds me actually of getting the religious exemption last year, which my husband had to do, because it's like, it's when you go through these things, you realize knowledge really is power. Right knowledge. I like to say right knowledge is power. When you understand what you have to do, you just become very clear on it, and you just go for it. And had it not worked out, well, we wouldn't have complied, you know, like that was also another hard no for us. So I think, and that's where community, like bringing us together, and you just realize we're not alone. There's so many of us. And, you know, so I really love your message. I love your vision. I love your vision for your daughter. You know, I have a son with special needs also, whose future's it's a little more like, he's a little younger, right? And so, but I love your vision. I think it's amazing. And you inspire me to keep going forward too. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you everyone for watching. It looks like we're hitting just about the hour mark. I think that we'll probably wrap it up here. If you have other comments or questions, if you're watching the replay, please throw them in the comments, or feel free to reach out to Bretigne or myself, and I will put all of the information in the comments. So thank you so much, Bretigne.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.